Welcome to another episode of the Now I Know Wellbeing podcast. It's been a year since I launched the podcast, and my first ever episode was with Dr Rina Bajaj, and the first episode was called Now I Know About Self-Care and Therapy. So I thought, what better way to have you back on, Rina, with me, my first anniversary of the podcast. So welcome back, Rina.
Thank you. Congratulations on a year.
Oh, thank you.
It's gone from like a concept to a thing, and now you're kind of, a year on.
But thank you as well, because I know we started this virtual, and you sort of introduced me to Ekam, who then told me about the studio. So it's been really lovely, and I think I'm definitely an in-person energy type person, so I love being in a studio. So I was really excited to have this in person, because we've spoken so much virtually or on the phone, so this has been an absolute pleasure. But today we're going to be talking about healthy relationships.
Yeah.
And Rina, in our first episode, we talked about a book you were launching, which was The Magic in Me. So anyone watching this episode, they can see the book here. It's sort of available on Amazon.
It's real.
It's real, it's live, and it's so exciting to hear you talk about it and now holding it. So your book is The Magic in Me, and it says transform your relationship with yourself and the key people in your life.
Yeah.
And I know when we spoke about February during launching this, and we talked about Valentine's, and you know, you mentioned about relationships with yourself as well, which is so important, and I think we can sometimes forget about the relationship with ourselves. But can you give the audience just a quick intro in terms of the book and what it's about? Yeah,
sure. So for me, I'm a psychologist, and I know that not everyone's going to access therapy, and a lot of the time we search for validation in external things, or we think we're going to be happy when we have the relationship, when we make the money, when we get the next job. And whilst it's good to have goals and strive towards that, I think what we don't do in day-to-day life is just take time to stop and reflect. So think about our needs, think about how we talk to ourselves in our head, think about essentially the relationship with ourselves, so internal validation. And so I wanted to give people something really practical that they could take away for 30 days, just to help them to reflect on both their internal world, so what they're saying to themselves, their sense of worth, how they feel about themselves, how they talk about themselves, but also their external world, so the people in their life, boundaries, what's healthy, what's not healthy for them emotionally, but also physically. And then the whole purpose is to move people into a sense of being more aligned with their true values and who they really are. So part of this really is about unlearning what we might know and kind of relearning what's healthier for us.
And what I really like about the book, like you said, not everyone has access to a therapist. And also with stigmas and taboos in society, some people don't want to see somebody, and this is like a way of still getting the help, but in a private way as well, if that's what suits you. Even some of the podcast episodes, I've had people say, I listened to that episode and it's helped me with something. So you're right, it's trying to find different ways of reaching people, and I think this book is really lovely. One thing that I really love is, for anyone who's got the book, if you go to page 17, Rina talks about affirmations. And there was a sentence in here which I really liked, and it said, affirmations can be useful in helping to shift our mindset over time so that we skew it away from negative thinking patterns and towards positive. Talk to me more about affirmations, because I follow you on socials as well. You're really big on affirmations, and so am I. Can you explain to someone listening, if they didn't know about affirmations, how would we describe it?
So affirmations gives you an opportunity to tune into that inner voice. So all of us have an inner voice. All of us have up to 100,000 thoughts a day, and we don't really pay attention to it. The thing with affirmations is if you're just saying something to yourself over and over again, but you don't believe it, it's not really going to have much of an effect. So the key thing to affirmations, these are I am statements. These are things that you integrate into your life as a way of changing your being and your relating with the world. And the key thing is the feeling. So if my inner thought, for example, is I'm not good enough, I'm awful, I'm a failure, and that's sort of what's replaying in my head, I can simply try and switch that to I'm amazing. But I might not believe that. But even if I start with a more neutral affirmation, like I'm trying my best, or I did that really well today, or I'm a survivor, or I'm resilient, I can start to believe that. And my thoughts and my feelings around that will change, and therefore my sense of self will change. So an affirmation is a statement that you bring into being. It's not just a statement that you say to yourself. So if I really believed, for example, that I was resilient, and that's something that I could align with, how would I be thinking if I was resilient? How would I be feeling? And what would I be doing? And so with affirmations, what you can then tag on is your actions. So it's not just a passive statement, which is sometimes how it's misconstrued. So we hear it a lot in the context of the universe and abundance and kind of creating different energies. So you can use it how you like. But if you're not believing it and you're not living in accordance with your affirmation, it's going to take longer to see the results.
Yeah. Another thing I like about affirmations is you can tailor it to something really specific. So, for example, like when I have to do a talk at work, I can get really nervous, and I have I've got this confidence affirmation in my phone, and I'll go over it. And you're right, but you have to really believe it before just saying it. So the actions are so important.
And look for evidence to support your affirmation. So it's not something that you want in the future. It's something you kind of align to in the now. So I do a lot of trauma work in my practice with clients, and we use affirmations to create things even around safety or being more present in the here and now. Especially when we're anxious or we're worried, we can go either to the past or we can worry about future what ifs. So affirmations can be a really nice way to just ground yourself in this moment too.
Oh, brilliant. I love that. My daughter's really into affirmations. She's got a GCSEs at the moment, so she's like, I am an A-grade student. I've got this. You know, those sort of things that just help her. And she writes them, so it's more specific to her, which is brilliant.
And you're never too young to start with the grounding and the affirmations.
Absolutely. And another, you know how you talk about, we can talk very negatively of ourselves.
Yeah.
And you've got on page 58, you've got something called about the critical voice.
Yeah.
And I know you've done workshops with a company called NABS.
Yeah.
And NABS are great for like wellbeing and anxiety workshops. And I went to one of their workshops, and they had another word for that voice in your head called the shitty committee. Yeah. And I just loved it because it's like cool. A group of people just sort of talking negatively. But talk to me more about the critical voice. And we all have it, but how do we silence it?
Yeah, so we've all got the critical voice, and we all hopefully have somewhere, even if it's small, the kind of cheerleader, the part of us that wants us to survive. And the critical voice isn't necessarily critical because it's mean and it doesn't care for us. Sometimes it's a coping mechanism that develops as a way to push us, or a way to kind of do better, but we can get our needs met in different ways. The critical voice can develop through our expectations, so either the things that we've internalized ourselves or things that have been said to us. So that includes parenting, our childhood, our beliefs, our experiences, the environments that we've been in, our relationships. What we do is we're a bit like a sponge. We internalize things about ourselves. So over time, if we've been in environments perhaps which aren't as healthy, or in relationships that aren't as healthy, we can start to internally believe that we're not good enough, and that can amp up the criticism. And so we can see that links in with things like self-doubt, or feeling low about ourselves, or not valuing ourselves. And then our actions align with that, which then reinforces this critical voice. It's a bit like, see, I told you you're rubbish. I told you can't do anything. I told you no one cares. Yeah. That's really painful. And I think going back to what you said earlier, reflection is really painful. You know, sometimes we want to just stay in what we know because it's familiar. And it's really hard to think about, like, what am I actually saying to myself? And a lot of the times it isn't conscious. So in terms of the critical voice, what I encourage people to do just to start off with is to just tune into your thoughts throughout the day. Not what you're actually saying, but what you're saying in your head. So are you calling yourself things like stupid, I'm an idiot, I messed up, I effed up, whatever it is. And then just start to gently be curious about that. Okay, so when I had that thought, where was I? Yeah. What was going on? How was I feeling? What was I thinking? Why was that triggered? Yeah. And you're kind of like looking at it really curiously to start off with. So you're zooming out. And then you can start to challenge and go, okay, this voice that says I'm rubbish, is it 100% true? Yeah. And we can believe our thoughts as if they are 100% true. But, you know, I probably have done some things well, so it can't be all bad or all good. So with thoughts, what happens is we tend to get into this rigidity. It's either this or it's that. It's good or it's bad. I'm amazing or I'm a failure. And actually what you're just trying to do is gently balance that out. So you're not even, again, like the affirmation, trying to flip a negative to a positive, but you're starting to make something a bit more believable. And what you can do over time, if you catch your thoughts, if you ask yourself, is it a fact, a fear, or an opinion? If you start to balance them out a little bit more, that kind of background music in your head starts to change.
Yeah.
And then your automatic thoughts start to change, and the way you react starts to change.
Yeah.
And over time, you skew that towards more of a balanced way of thinking about yourself.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that, because it's reminding me of a time when I think I was spiraling into that negative, and you can see yourself spiraling when you start to disengage with socials. You know, I've started to notice my signs.
Yeah.
And I know I've got 2 people I can phone where I can tell them how I'm feeling, and they will just flip the script and be like, and you can come off that phone and just feel so uplifted. So what I started to do was, and I thought to myself, we can be quite harmful to ourselves in terms of our words, but if that was my friend phoning me, what would they say to me?
Definitely.
And I try and repeat as if, like, if I just phoned a friend and they said that same thing, what would I say back? And try and say that to myself and come out of it as well. But it's trying to keep those skills, isn't it? Because we can have highs and lows in life.
And it is a life skill. This isn't about a cure. This is about coping better. So the more you practice, the easier it becomes. And I always say to clients, initially it's going to feel like you have to do this, and it's going to feel like a chore. And that familiar voice is going to be like, why do we need to change? Let's just go back to what we know.
Yeah.
But actually, if you put the investment in, like you go to the gym and train your body, what you're doing is retraining your brain, retraining your mind, creating new neural pathways in your brain, which then helps you to react differently. So I think that's a great tip in terms of what would a good friend say to you. What would you say to a child?
Yeah.
Would you say these things to a child? Probably not. You know, is it 100% true? But you could also think about your hand. So who are the 5 people or, you know, 5 places where you feel safe? So it could be at home, within your family, friends, at work. So try and identify like a few key people. What are the things that's the palm of your hand that you use to self-manage? So when you're spiraling, what helps you to feel safer? What helps you to feel more grounded? Is it art? Is it music? Is it going for a walk? What could you take control of yourself? And then up your sleeve, what are the emergency kind of people or services that you could tap into if you're really struggling? That might be a therapist, it might be a helpline. So that way it also helps you to take some control over how you access people or how you access support and when and why.
I really like that. I might get my kids to draw their hands. And
Yes,
just like...
I do with children. I get them to draw around it, and your hand usually is always with you, right?
So that's really, really good. Great tip, guys, audience listening. And another thing, I know we're talking about healthy relationships, but boundaries is really, really important. And I think I've learned over life that setting boundaries as a people pleaser, it was quite hard back in the day, but now I feel like I can very easily say no to things. And could you explain to the audience like exactly what you would describe as a boundary and the importance of it?
Yeah, so boundaries are probably like the easiest way to say it, are rules for life. There are conditions. So boundaries set the tone for what we accept, what we think is okay, how we value ourselves. Boundaries are linked in with our self-worth, our self-esteem, our image of ourselves. So it's the way that we navigate through life, the way that we treat ourselves and the way that we allow other people to treat us too. And there's different kinds of boundaries. So there's going to be boundaries that are more non-negotiable. That's a definite no. And then there's going to be ones that are a bit more negotiable. So you may bend sometimes in terms of some of the boundaries. And that's on a very case-by-case basis. You've also got boundaries that relate to your emotions. So how you feel, your thoughts, how you think, your physical boundaries in terms of your space and touch, but also things like your financial boundaries and investment. So it's quite a large term, but really it's the rules that navigate our life. And I think when we're in a healthy situation with our boundaries, we feel safe. And that's one of the key things. It's not just physical safety, but it's also emotional safety. So can you show up as yourself? Can you have an opinion without being fearful? Can you say no? Does that feel okay? You know, are you scared? Or are you able to feel the fear and do it anyway?
Yeah, I like that, feel the fear and do it anyway. And in terms of boundaries, right now, in terms of the corporate world, cost of living, a lot of people are losing their jobs. And the people left in the companies are feeling burnout because they're absorbing any of the workload. And you know, I've been talking to people in the workplace about setting their boundaries with their peers or their stakeholders or their managers. What advice could you give somebody who is in that world right now where they've had to absorb a lot of the workload, they're feeling burnt out? What sort of a boundary could they communicate or set?
It's really tough, isn't it? And I think sometimes we look to organisations to almost be the parent and to take care of us. And some organisations are really good at that and some aren't. So I think where we wait for them to take care of us, it's like we're giving our power away. So if there are any wellbeing initiatives, do definitely tap into them. If there's employee assistance program where you can get counselling or talk to someone about practical issues, do that. It's confidential. Think about what your workplace offers in terms of wellbeing related support. But then I think there's a second layer to that, which is what can we do to take care of ourselves? Because in most companies, everyone's replaceable, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but it's factual. If you were to leave a role, someone would eventually come into that. If an organisation was to break down, you would have to find a way to carry on. So that's important to remember when you're thinking about how much you're emotionally and practically investing into an organisation. And then you start to think about the things that you can do to take control over how you're feeling and thinking. So if you are staying within that organisation, can you incorporate things like moments of mindfulness? Can you prioritise your self-care even if it's at the weekend? Can you set some time boundaries around when you're on emails, when you're not? Can you turn your work phone off? Can you practice some breathing throughout the day? Can you take a lunch break? Can you think about who is a safe person within your organisation if you need to just decompress at the end of the week? So I think focusing on your own grounding and prioritising your own self-care is an important part of boundary setting. And there might come a time where you need to say no. So a lot of the time what comes up is this imposter syndrome, that if I'm not perfect, if I'm not switched on all the time, that I'm failing. And usually when it's task-related stuff, people either over-prepare or they procrastinate, but really it's a self-doubt that fuels that. So just think about your capabilities. I encourage people to create what I call a brag bank, because what we can do is lose sight of our value. Really think about what you bring to the organisation, all of your achievements, how you show up every day, and use that as a way to start to challenge any internal critical voice. So where you think you're failing, it's not true. Yeah. You're an asset. So I think holding your worth, and then that will give you a confidence to not be so scared to either say no, not right now, or I can do that, but if I'm going to do that, I'm going to need this from you. You can also then manage your emotional investment, so how much you emotionally engage in the tasks versus how much you kind of cut off. So I think there's a responsibility of how you take care of yourself within an environment which may not be as healthy or as safe.
That's been really useful. The brag bank, I'm going to start using that one. I like that. Yeah. And I think what you're saying as well is really important, like having a lot of evidence-based things to sort of affirm that you are, you are worthy and you are valued. Yeah. And I think in terms of boundaries in the workplace, and I think I'm very good at setting boundaries in my workplace, but I think because I've been in the industry a lot longer, I'm older, so for the younger generation, they don't know what to do, and is this the way it is in the corporate world? So I'm trying to mentor our younger talent as if did you know it's okay to say, I need to go for a walk? Did you know you can get up from your desk? And these little things. And I think this year what I'm trying to work on is setting boundaries as a podcaster. Yeah. So I think, the first year was about building it and just getting all the guests on whenever they were available. Yeah. And now it's been a year, I thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to slow down. I've got a full-time job. I'm a single mum. So really I need space for this and energy. So I now say to my guests, I do one a month. Yeah. So let me know which month works for you, and then I can slot it in. But it's having those boundaries in your personal and professional to juggle both. Definitely.
It's kind of looking at models, modelling that behaviour. So senior leadership teams should be doing that. Exactly. It's one thing kind of saying it and one thing doing it. Yeah. And I think building in those reflective moments is going to have an impact on the work that you do anyway. Because if you take time to reflect, you're going to be more switched on, your concentration is going to be better, your memory is going to be better, your problem solving is going to be better. So actually by you taking time out and prioritising your self-care, it benefits the organisation as well.
Absolutely. So in terms of the boundaries, I know in 2023 you launched your book, you've been on BBC News, you've been a guest on the Happy Place podcast with Fern Cotter, which I absolutely love her. You've written many articles in magazines. So what is in store for you for 2024? What are your goals and how are you setting yourself some boundaries?
Do you know what? Similar to you, Resham, I am going to just get into flow. I think last year there was a lot around need to get stuff done, and I was getting into that reactive mode. So for me, one of the hardest challenges for me actually has been to slow down. So I had a belief that actually if I'm not working or really working hard, that there was a fear around, am I going to get clients? Is my business going to run? I need to be doing something all of the time. So for me, that is my personal challenge, is to actually slow down and to flow and to have some boundaries around my time, and to actually enjoy the process. So, you know, I might have some goals in terms of like growing the business or staying engaged with the media. But apart from that, I'm happy to just be this year.
That's really nice. State of flow, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree. I'm with you on that one.
Yeah.
So, this goes by so quickly, these episodes, so I'll probably have to get you on a third time, Rina, but we have a closing question today, and this episode is called Now I Know About Healthy Relationships. Can you describe a time in your life where you were in an unhealthy relationship, personal or professional or with yourself? How would you replay that scenario with all the tools and techniques you now know to ensure the result is a healthier relationship?
Sure. So I think we can always learn from our past, right? And it's always easy to look back in hindsight. But one of the biggest shifts for me was moving from a job to setting up my own practice and working for myself full time. And that was really challenging. So I think there was a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around, can I do it? Am I good enough? What's this going to look like? I've never run a business. How am I going to do that? Will clients even want to come to me? Am I going to be sitting in an office on my own and not being able to pay my bills, blah, blah, blah. So that's where the critical voice starts spiraling. But I also knew instinctively that the environment that I was in wasn't healthy for me. So I was feeling burnt out. I was feeling tired. I was feeling unsafe. I was feeling unappreciated, just in terms of my achievements or what I was doing for the organisations that I was working with. And it wasn't feeling fulfilling. So I really got to a crossroads where I thought, right, I can continue working in this way and feeling unfulfilled. Or like I encourage my clients to do, I can take a risk and push myself out of my comfort zone. What that does, though, is it encourages you and makes you think about what you're saying to yourself. You kind of have to face your fears head on. So what I would have done differently is probably got to that point earlier on. I think I would have really started to acknowledge my worth rather than tap into the fear. So I started to think about my own brag bank. What have I done for the organisation? How much money have I brought in? What are the successes in terms of my project? But also in my private practice, where have I had clients come through? What have I tried that's worked? And I started to balance the thoughts out. And I decided that I can take the risk. So I think it was a lot of inner work in terms of having those self-doubts, but also really starting to face them head on. Challenging my concept around what success and failure means, but also knowing that in essence I was good enough based on the feedback that I'd already received. And so the external, but also the people around me, so who would be supportive of my emotional needs and my practical needs, who could I talk to? So for me, thinking about my own personal therapy, supervision, what are the structures that I need to feel safer in my external world? And then I got into a morning routine where I start with a grounding technique. How I start my day is quite important to me. I start with reflection. I start to notice when I go into fight or flight. I prioritize my self-care. I created very strict boundaries around the days that I work and the times. So for me, it's also an opportunity to create a healthier boundary as I transition into something that aligns more with me. So I'd encourage people to reflect on their values, like what's important to you, but also what do you bring to relationships, and is that reciprocated? And if it's not, there's always other options, but sometimes it means facing that fear a little bit more.
That is lovely. Lovely insight of what you would do, isn't it, and how you do it differently. But thank you so much, Rina. It's been an absolute pleasure talking all about healthy relationships and boundaries and that inner voice. And if people want to know more about the sort of work you do, episode 1 is all about self-care as well, and we talked about it in more detail, and we talked about how to get therapy in all the ways. And also, even in your book, The Magic in Me, there's lots of resources at the back, isn't it, about how to get more help as well, like you mentioned. But is there anything we haven't covered that you want to say to the audience?
Just to say that it's a work in progress, and I think if we view it that way, we can constantly evolve. It's not about getting to a destination, it's really about being more present in this moment. And that also takes courage to kind of show up for yourself, to really tune into your thoughts and your feelings. But when you live in that way, you're much more empowered, and actually you've got much more control over your life rather than trying to overplan things.
Thank you so much, Rina, for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure in person. We finally did it.
Yeah.
And good luck with everything in 2024.
Thank you.
Really excited to see what it holds for you. And we'll definitely stay in touch and maybe do another episode, maybe another time in the year, because my audience actually loved your first episode and they were like, we have to get Rina back on. So if the audience want to have another topic, we can arrange that as well. So let us know what you want to hear about. But thank you, Rina.
Thank you so much.
And to the audience, thank you for listening.